upon indigenous rights in the clean energy transition. So, Ernest, I mean, what Kate Finn says gets to really the heart of the important conversation that you keep saying the American people need to have. And I want to get to something which I think is very, very unique about this moment. Because in previous generations, previous centuries, as we've touched on all this week, the profound negative aspects of colonialism and the very extractive approaches that external powers have taken on places like, Africa, Southeast Asia, South America. It's clear. I mean, it's quite black and white that people suffer immediately and long term. There's no question about it. And very few people benefited. But here, with the need to increase mining in order to guarantee a clean energy future for the world, the moral question is not so cut and dry, right? Because, yeah, there are going to be some downsides of expanding mining. But we're asking people to make that sacrifice in exchange to, pull back the devastation of climate change that is happening and coming in the next several decades, and centuries. Those devastations will also be met upon the people who live on mining lands, no matter what happens, unless we make that clean energy transition. Do you see what I mean? I mean, it's much more murky.
It's a huge tension point. And as you say, for generations, some indigenous peoples have been treated horribly, and they are going to be understandably suspect if you come to them and say, now you must sort of bear the physical brunt and the metaphorical brunt of this clean energy transition unless you bring them along in a responsible and ethical and moral way. That's why I think it's so important to be having a discussion about what are the types of minings that we're going to allow and how we're actually going to allow mining. Douglas at ARPA-E, talking about different technologies, I think that's a key part of the conversation here as well. On Monday, we were discussing direct lithium extraction. There's also technologies around copper leaching and other ways that could lessen the need for a quote unquote hole in the ground. Now, that's not to say that we're not going to still need to have those holes in the ground moving forward, but having input and dialogue with all affected parties, the more and more I reported on the mining industry, the more and more that seems to be a key part of the conversation moving forward here.
How can that? But can I just jump in here,
Sure.
Ernest? Because maybe we're about to say the same thing, but what I heard Kate talk about there is that the timeline is too tight to make these important systematic changes. Like if we want to get to 50% emissions reductions by 2030, which is what President Biden has said, that's only 6 years from now. And she does not see the political infrastructure in place to have all the voices at the table of indigenous peoples in that timeline.
I would agree with that. I mean, these conversations take much longer than some would like. And I think with the concept that Kate was alluding to is known as free, prior, and informed consent. And it's a bit of industry jargon, but it essentially means that indigenous communities give their acquiescence to extractive projects. And that can take a while. Many indigenous groups, especially in the United States, prefer what's called government-to-government consultation. That means they want their tribal council speaking with the United States federal government rather than the mining industry. And that does frustrate the mining industry, but from the tribe's perspectives, that's their government speaking to another government, sort of how the United Kingdom would speak to the United States. Yeah. And that's how they approach these complex issues. And sometimes those conversations can take years, and they don't move as fast, say, as some in the mining industry would like.
This is all wrapped up in a very interesting story about a particular flower that grows on some lithium deposits. Can you briefly tell us that story?
Certainly. This, to me, encapsulates everything we've been discussing this week, and it's the reason why I used it as the narrative spine for my book, For the War Below. There's this rare flower found nowhere else on the planet at a site about 200 miles north of Las Vegas. Now, that flower, though, loves this lithium-rich soil, and underneath that flower sits one of the largest deposits of lithium in the country. And the question becomes, what matters more? If we dig out the lithium, could the flower be destroyed? And if we do nothing, wouldn't the flower go extinct due to climate change? And so it sets up this big tension point between the company that would like to develop this lithium project and a conservation group that is so focused on biodiversity and the need for that. And we heard on Monday this week about the big focus and the need for us to really be thinking through biodiversity. And we really get to meet the people on both sides of this issue. And what I found so fascinating is the gentleman that's the chairman of the company that would like to develop this mine. He used to be in oil and gas. And for him, he finds that the development of this mine is his way to help basically make penance, to leave the planet cleaner than the one that he found. He wants his kids and grandchildren to have a cleaner planet than the one that he found. But on the other side, you have a conservationist that's saying, yes, I believe in lithium. Yes, I think it's great. We have this energy transition. But if we let this flower go extinct, what's next? Is it a big tree? Is it an animal? Is it, a people's way of life? What is the line in the sand here? Is this a slippery slope?
Yeah.
And then there's also broader questions of whether or not you can develop this mine and let the flower thrive and grow at the same time. Can they coexist? And then you put politics on top of it and policy, and you've got one arm of the U.S. federal government that decides to lend money to the company that's wanting to develop the mine, while at the same time you have another arm of the U.S. federal government that declares the flower endangered. And so how do both of those things happen, and how do both of those things coexist?
Wow.
And so you just put all of this into a pot, and for me, it just made for a really interesting stew of complexity that I really want us to grapple with. And that's why I made it, as I said, the narrative spine for this story.
Yeah. And that tension is happening everywhere around the world,
Yes,
a version of that. And by the way, the flower is named Team's Buckwheat, right?
Team's Buckwheat,
okay.
Yes.
Well, so, this series, it might seem like, wow, these are problems that are huge, insurmountable. Politicians, lawmakers, business people are the ones that, sitting at the levers of power. But I want to close in the last minute and a half that we have with you, me, and everybody listening. Because, Ernest, we asked On Point listeners to complete this sentence. Mining is blank for the world's clean energy transition. And many, many listeners filled in that blank with the word critical, for the world's clean energy transition. But that's not all.
Mining is
a problem.
Well-reasoned.
Necessary.
Destructive.
Mining is a death wish.
critical.
The word is essential.
Complicated.
Mining is key.
A human atrocity.
Mining is not a good long-term approach.
Mining is going to be devastating for the environment.
Mining is going to be a mixed bag for the world's clean energy future.
Okay, Ernest, we got about 15, 20 seconds to end this monumental week for us. What do you think are the questions that people should be asking themselves as they think about the clean energy transition and mining?
I think people should look around their houses and where they go shop and look at all of the electronic gadgets and gizmos that are so essential and that are used in our everyday lives. And think about the lithium and the copper and the cobalt and the nickel in all of those devices. And think about how those devices have changed the past 30 or 40 years to incorporate more of those critical minerals. Then be thinking about the choices that we need to be making and the choices we need to demand our policymakers make about where we get these important building blocks.
Well, Ernest Schreider, senior correspondent at Reuters and author of The War Below, Lithium, Copper, and the Global Battle to Power Our Lives. Ernest, I can't thank you enough for being a major part of our entire week of coverage. Thank you, Ernest.
It was so great to be with you, Meghna.
So that's it for our special series, Elements of Energy. If you missed any part of this week or you want to listen back to any episode again, you can find them all in our podcast feed. And make sure you subscribe to On Point so you never miss an episode in our podcast. I'm Meghna Chakrabarty. Thanks for being with us all this week for Elements of Energy, mining for a green future. This is On Point.
On Point is a production of WBUR Boston and is distributed by APM, American Public Media.
Support for On Point comes from the Museum of Science in Boston, dedicated to inspiring a lifelong love of science in everyone, in museums, classrooms, and online, offering engineering design challenges, digital experiences, live presentations, and more. MOS.org. And the Elliott Hotel, a boutique hotel in Boston's Back Bay, near major universities, cultural institutions, Newbury Street shopping and dining, and Fenway Park entertainment. ElliottHotel.com.
This is KUOW-FM Seattle, KUOW Tumwater, KQOW Bellingham. It's 11:59 and coming up an hour of rich, fascinating content we call Week in Review. Here's your host, Bill Radke.
Rich and fascinating. Well put. I will take that. We're going to discuss the news of the week, as we do, like whatever happened to No Youth Jail. And do cell phones have any place in the classroom? What will our state's two-party system be like post-Trump? Should we kill an eastern owl to save a northwestern owl? You know, those Eastern owls are not like you and me. And you do not want to get between a snail and the mantis shrimp at Seattle's brand new aquarium building. Don't do it, Bernard.
And we'll find out why. At some
You will
point.
find out why,
Okay.
but just trust me. If you're thinking of doing it, call me first.
Thanks. You warned me just in time.
Yes, I did.
Thanks.
Support for KUOW comes from Bloodworks Northwest Music's in Our Blood campaign, bringing together the Pacific Northwest music community to benefit patients at local hospitals. More at bloodworksnw.org/music.
Hi, it's Libby Denkman. Is the constant churn of this election season just way too much? I'm with you there. That's why KUOW strives to cut through the noise and bring you the most important political news and conversations shaping our region, like Sound Politics, a new local podcast I co-host with Scott Greenstone, and KUOW's partnership with A Braver Way, hosted by Monica Guzman, your guide across the political divide. More at KUOW.org/elections.
Support for KUOW comes from Hope Link, presenting their 29th annual Reaching Out Luncheon with keynote remarks by Stephanie Land, author of Made, Hard Work, Low Pay, October 21st from noon to 1 at Maidenbauer Center in Bellevue and streaming online. Registration available at hopelink.org.
74 degrees in Seattle. Sunny today is the forecast with a high of 80. Tonight we're going to drop to about 59 under a mostly clear sky. Saturday sunny again. Sunday sunny again. Weekend high temps in the low 80s.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Lakshmi Singh. The Harris presidential campaigns announced it will launch a bus tour next week to advocate for reproductive rights. And it starts in former President Donald Trump's backyard, Palm Beach, Florida. The campaign's attempting to build on the momentum of its bus tour in southern Georgia, where she said in her first major TV interview since becoming nominee that reproductive rights, abortion access should be restored across the country. Former President Donald Trump appears to be attempting to soften his public stance on the abortion issue. He's also said he supports IVF, but now says it should be up to each state to decide. In June, most Republicans in the U.S. Senate, including Trump's running mate J.D. Vance, voted against a bill that would have guaranteed IVF access across the U.S. after a legal battle in Alabama temporarily stalled IVF treatments in the state.
We have multiple Republican measures that support fertility treatment, support IVF, but don't require Christian hospitals or other religious organizations to violate their conscience. I think all of us accept that we live in a big country with diversity of opinions. We want women to have access to this needed medical treatment. We also want to make sure that Christian organizations can live their conscience.
Vance on CNN. Maryland State Supreme Court has reinstated for now the conviction of Adnan Syed. Syed was convicted of murder in 2000 in a case that would become the subject of the hit true crime podcast Serial. NPR's Andrew Limbong has more.
There have been a lot of developments in the case of Adnan Syed, but this latest one has to do with Young Lee, the brother of Hae Min Lee, the woman whose death has been at the center of all of this. Lee's family argued their rights as the victim's family were violated when Young Lee was not given enough notice in 2022 when the Baltimore City State Attorney held a hearing to vacate Adnan Syed's conviction. Lee lives in California and was given less than 1 business day's notice to attend. The court denied Lee's request to delay the hearing by a week. The Maryland Supreme Court is siding with the Lee family. A new judge will now re-review the case. In the meantime, Syed will be able to remain free. Andrew Limbong, NPR News.
Honduras says it's ending an extradition treaty with the U.S. More from NPR's Ada Peralta.
Throughout history, the treaty has been used to extradite dozens of Honduran politicians to the United States so they could face trial. The most high profile was former President Juan Orlando Hernandez, who was extradited to the U.S. in 2022. He was found guilty of drug trafficking and sentenced to 45 years in prison. The Honduran president, Xiomara Castro, decided to end the treaty after the U.S. ambassador in Honduras criticized a high-level meeting between Honduran and Venezuelan officials. In a statement, Castro said U.S. meddling in Honduras was intolerable. The U.S. attacks and violates international norms that advance the sovereignty and self-determination of a people, she said. It's enough. Ada Peralta, NPR News, Mexico City.
This is NPR.
This is KUOW News. I'm Kevin Kniestead in Seattle. Light rail to Linwood opens today, and all up and down the line, cities have been building new neighborhoods near the stations. They're designed to be walkable with lots of businesses nearby so that people don't have to get in their cars to have some fun after work. KUOW's Joshua McNichols has more.
Madeline Blay and Jacob Dix recently moved into their new apartment near Mount Lake Terrace Station. They love that they can just walk downstairs and visit businesses on the ground floor.
Yeah, we went to Zeke's literally last night. That's my favorite pizza place around here, so it's very convenient if we're feeling lazy and you want to go catch a beer or go get dinner.
How about you?
I'm excited about the trampoline park that they have. I haven't used it yet, but I used to go when I was a kid all the time, so I figured when I have some free time, I'll check it out.
One thing this neighborhood lacks is a grocery store. City officials hope that'll come later. Joshua McNichols, KUOW News.
The Marysville School Board has approved a new budget as the district continues to deal with a massive financial crisis. Board members signed off on the new plan yesterday and will now submit it to the state, according to Cairo 7 News. The district enters into a binding conditions agreement with the state last year because it couldn't balance its budget. This week, the state superintendent placed the district under an enhanced financial oversight plan. This will allow a special administrator to oversee the district's finances, its hiring and personnel actions, along with other contract and liquidation decisions. It's going to be a warm Labor Day weekend with daytime highs bouncing between the 80s to the mid-70s by Monday. Just be aware, several local swimming areas in King County are closed because of toxic algae outbreaks and high bacteria levels. So steer clear of the water at Cottage Lake in Woodinville, Echo Lake in Shoreline, and Jean Coulon Beach in Renton. And don't go swimming at Houghton Beach and O.O. Denny Park in Kirkland, and Maidenbower Bay Beach and Newcastle Beach in Bellevue. This is KUOW News.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Fisher Investments. As a fiduciary, Fisher Investments is obligated to act in their client's best interest. Learn more at FisherInvestments.com. Investing in securities involves the risk of loss. This is NPR.
Welcome to Friday. Welcome to KUOW's Week in Review, a Labor Day weekend Friday at that. I am Bill Radke. Donald Trump says Democrats want to abolish the suburbs. Some local Democrats might agree with that assessment. Speaking of which, what will the Washington State Republican Party be once Trump's career is over? We're going to discuss that stuff as we break down the week's news for you. My panel this week, Seattle Times investigations editor, Jonathan Martin. Welcome back.
Hey, Bill.
Political analyst and contributing columnist. Welcome back, Joni Balter.
Good to see you all.
Welcome back, Geekwire contributing editor, Mike Lewis.
Hey, Bill.
And welcoming you to YouTube, where you can watch the show if you just search KUOW. Topic number one this week, no youth jail. We heard that chant from local activists in 2020, part of Seattle's anti-policing, anti-incarceration crusade. And they were talking, in the case of no youth jail, about the King County Juvenile Detention Center in Seattle's Central District. They said we were caging children. The county executive vowed to eventually close that facility, and yet this week, the county council voted unanimously to keep the juvenile detention facility open. Councilmember Gurmai Zahalai said we should just make the youth jail more therapeutic and rehabilitative.
We need a secure building for public safety reasons. It's critical to protect our community and ensure that those who have committed serious offenses are housed in a way that prevents further harm. And it's equally true that incarceration, the traditional models of incarceration, can have devastating effects on the developing brains of young people, making them more likely to reoffend and perpetuating a cycle of violence and incarceration.
So is this new King County Council advisory vote a flip-flop away from the anti-detention, anti-policing campaigns of 2020?
Absolutely. It's a move away. It's profound to have an 8-0 vote on this after all the talk of no youth jail and all the promises. It seems to me that especially the county executive, Dow Constantine, fell for a slogan, not a solution. And we all know how well those slogans make for great policy. I think it's pretty profound that the county council would vote this way. For example, they have been, what I've heard about this is that they have been looking at the list of folks in youth detention and some of the crimes associated with people at very young ages, and that some of the change may have come from just looking at that and trying to absorb, hey, it was a great idea when it was far off. And Dow Constantine at the time was preparing to run for governor. Oh, so we'll close the jail in 2025, no 26, no 28. Okay.
But you said they looked at what? They looked at higher rates of violent
they looked
felonies?
At who is spending their time in youth detention and for what kind of crimes, and can you wish this problem away? In other words, and by the way, you're required by state law to have such a place, but they were going to work their way around this and some alternatives. And you stole my quote there that I put in my notes here from Council Member Zahale. I think he made it about right. Like, you have to have a secure building, he says, but you also have to find other ways so that we don't destroy young people as they develop in their brains. We have to make the incarceration more productive.
Interestingly, he campaigned as a no youth jail council member as well. So
thanks for pointing that out.
There's been
right.
flips throughout the council on that. I think Joni's point about the rising crime rates and your juvenile crime rates and what you do with the kids who are charged with serious crimes. It's when there's not a reasonable alternative, for public safety, you can have, I remember covering cases where a kid was accused of doing something bad within their own home. You're supposed to send that kid back home where the victim is. But I kind of think about the need for this youth detention facility in a larger context, and I think there's a lot of flashing red lights that the kids are not all right. I think that fentanyl deaths among youth are up 50% year over year from 2013 to 2023. You've got chronic absenteeism in schools. We've seen just a string of absolutely heartbreaking and horrific crimes committed by allegedly committed by children, including the kids who showed up with, automatic weapons at in the ID for the community festival. So I think this is the council at one point embracing basically a kind of a test kitchen of progressive ideas about a progressive approach to criminal justice, and listening to the community and seeing it was not a practical idea, and they said they had not set up a practical alternative.
Bill, you're old enough to probably have had some experience with things that seemed like a really good idea when you did it, like a members only jacket, and then
did this happen to you?
And then didn't later on. I got in
Bill totally had a members only
cargo
jacket.
short, bicycle shorts is fashion, things like that. I remember getting in an argument in the Sacramento Bee newsroom about how no one is going to need a camera in their phone, and I literally defended this point.
Yeah.
My point is this: I think the King County Council as well as the City Council are realizing that some positions they took, defunding the police, no youth jail, were terrible positions, and they didn't have. And the problem was not just that the position itself sounded good, sort of like you said, in some sort of, hothouse
test kitchen,
whatever it was. The idea was they also didn't have an alternative to replace that thing with. There were two problems with it. I think that
are there two problems? Or is that only one problem? That it's a good idea if you set up the practical alternative.
Well, I don't know. There's probably a myriad of problems, actually. I mean, if we really want to break it down. But here's the point: is they brought this thing out without an alternative, without an idea behind it. Like we're going to end this, but we're not going to start something new to replace what had been. And then it turns out that the actual removing of it, the defund the police, when you actually had a legal contract, like you couldn't actually logistically do this. And the same with the youth jail. I mean, obviously, a youth jail run in many traditional ways is not a good idea, and it has created probably as much harm, if not more, than it's done, than it's solved. But you also can sort of look at the way you're doing rehabilitation as opposed to incarceration, and actually have a facility that would be helpful, both for the people inside of it and for the people in the communities. And that's, I think, what they're pivoting to that now, and I think that's a really good idea.
One of the ironies too is they built this juvenile detention center with more rehabilitation in mind. The previous facility was, I think, it had been built in the 70s and remodeled, and
Right.
it looked
Exactly.
It looked
Right.
like it looked like a classic version of a jail. The new facility is intended to be much more therapeutic. So they actually have a facility that they were preparing to close down that looks more like what would be the progressive version of that.
Absolutely.
I think we have to admit that, Seattle, King County, we fell for some gimmicks around here and we didn't think them through enough. And the public mood, especially now, is coalescing around, yes, alternatives and some prevention kind of things. But also public safety is something we really have to pay attention to if we want quality of life in our region.
Well, okay, before we just say what a dumb gimmick, let me just try to paint the picture that I was getting from the initiative. It wasn't just fling open all the jail doors. It is for juveniles, a more individualized approach. You detain as a last resort, fewer people in smaller groups at home, maybe use an ankle bracelet. So we're not warehousing kids on the cheap in a way where they're just practically not going to get help. Meanwhile, a respite and receiving center when arrested kids are taken in, support for kids who go back home, short-term housing if going home is not safe, education, mental health care. So I'm trying to make the case before we leave it in our rearview mirror that the idea of less incarceration and moving away from needing one big centralized warehouse, much nicer warehouse, that was what I thought we were being sold.
I think that's fair. That's a very fair point, but I don't think that they're necessarily mutually exclusive, right? You could have done all of these things while having that facility there and actually had a plan in place. These were all very sort of nebulous ideas that were thrown forth as alternatives, many of them good ideas, but they were just ideas. They were not in policy yet. They certainly weren't funded, but what we were going to do is actually close something without any real plan in place to replace it, and I think that's my main complaint.
I'll just agree with you there, Mike, that all of those sound way smarter than putting too many young people in a youth jail. But you have to do both exactly at the same time. You can't say, well, let's just close it and see what happens. That's not sound policy. And we didn't move quick. We did move on some of those ideas, but we didn't move quickly enough.
I think too, when the implementation of a progressive idea is just as important in some ways as the idea itself. We see this with other elements of Seattle government. I think the idea that the CARES team, which is the alternative response to you had sort of mental health crises that cops are traditionally assigned to, I think you get incredibly broad support for that in Seattle. But we had the defund the police start. That was the idea, and now the CARES team 4 years later is really small, and it's being ramped up, but it's still kind of this pilot project kind of mode. I feel like in a lot of progressive ideas start very broad, and then we implement pilot projects that don't actually move the needle on what the underlying policy really needs to be successful.
Okay, then maybe my last question on this is: do you believe that this, the idea of close this juvenile detention center, are you saying that was never serious and I would say therefore cynical, or that no, that was absolutely heartfelt and serious and that was the plan and they worked the plan and found out, okay, we extended the deadline, it's not 2025, let's say 2028. Now council members are saying, it's probably not going to happen.
Well, I think it was heartfelt and not cynical, but I don't think that these ideas, as they come out, think ahead enough to the impacts of, say, defund police. So just your example a minute ago, Jonathan, the CARES team was supposed to be bigger, right? But we didn't count at that time how much the defund rhetoric would chase away officers and create.
Okay, but so let's leave aside, because you're right. So there's the argument that the defund talk rhetoric chases away officers, and we have a staffing problem. But that's different from the
one thing,
close the youth detention center. Okay, maybe a little later. Okay, maybe not. What was the big harm in setting that? If it's not cynical, if it's an idealistic goal, what's the problem?
Well, I would say one thing is that King County started with an extraordinarily low detention rate to begin with. Washington State, in fact, is one of the lowest detention overall rates of detention in the country. We have the number of cells per capita is, I think it's, I'm not going to guess, but it's very, very low. And King County on the juvenile rate level was also very, very, very low. So it started from a place where obviously the advocates believe very strongly that it was a more therapeutic way of treating juvenile justice. I don't think any of us are saying it's a dumb idea to have a different and more therapeutic approach to juvenile justice. Okay. To me, it just goes back to, if you don't have the policy to implement it, all you're doing is just having sort of progressive, mouth movements.
Mm-hmm. My dad used to say mouth movements. Yeah,
I was going to say gum flapping too, but whatever.
He would say verbal arm waving as well.
Progressive campfires, I think, is what you were trying to say.
Sometimes verbal diarrhea would. So it depended on his mood.
Dad is coming in for a few hits here.
Dad was a wordsmith. Mike, anything to add before we move on?
I'm not sure that the premise of your point was necessarily a fair one. I don't know that it can't be all of those things. It can be both cynical and it can be. I mean, that's a sliding scale, right? So I think there were people who parroted that notion who probably were cynical about it, and I think there were people who were idealistic. I think there were a lot of people who. The talk I heard when I was doing interviews about it was that people did want something concrete as a replacement, and I always thought those were really good points. But the councils were very interested in making kind of a splash with a political point of getting this thing through quickly while the moment was hot. And that was the problem. Rather than somebody standing up, an adult in the room standing up saying, all right, we've got some good ideas here. Let's actually put our shoulders to the wheel and maybe get this thing concrete. And that's what didn't happen. And I think that there was a variety of motives behind this, but that was the component that was missing.
I agree with Mike. I think in that summer of 2020 as well, the Overton window of law and criminal justice reform
had what's possible.
Yeah,
right, exactly.
It had really expanded, and the idea of defund went from a very fringe idea to like a fairly widely discussed idea nationwide, as with the success of the Black Lives Matter movement. So I think that the policy agenda in that time period, we now look back and say, was it cynical or what? But in that moment, it felt like this is a moment for big swings on policy changes.
Okay, since we're talking about public safety, let's talk about public safety inside our school buildings and on our school campuses, because there have been shootings at and near local schools, Seattle schools. Some of them have been fatal. This week, the city of Seattle and the school district announced a $15 million safety and security plan. More counselors, social workers, cameras, fences, more police outside on campus during lunch and before and after school, and school security guards, not including armed police officers in schools, and students will, for now at least, not have to carry identification badges or use clear backpacks. We have debated school officers on this show, and we've talked about school safety so many times, unfortunately. Where do you come down on whether this is addressable and how the city and school district are doing?
Well, I think parents demanded this. If you remember back at the end of the school year, after particularly the Garfield shooting, parents did not want their kids anywhere near the school buildings for the end of that academic year. And now that kids are back and going back and all of that, I think we really have to address the students and the parents' anxiety. And so I'm glad to see school security officers back there. There is some demonstrable results that you see from that. Kids who are worried about something get to know these officers. Officers hear about something and can sometimes intercede. This is a good thing to do. And meanwhile, plenty of mental health counseling, and a lot of that money is going to go to mental health counseling. So yeah, I think we really have to listen to the folks who are in the school buildings as to what do you need? How can we make you feel better? And, get back to that thing called educating kids.
I think that's a fair point. I think that they don't have much of a choice. I mean, given the declining enrollment, they don't have much of a choice but to listen to what parents are saying about this. I think there's a level of, for a variety of standpoints, not just school safety, of advancing mistrust on Seattle's public schools. And I think that this is going to do something to say, like, we're listening to you. So I think, if for nothing else, it's a great PR campaign. But I actually would hope that it would add some measure of safety. And it's not just a measure of safety. I think that having, particularly when it works really well, and we were talking about Danny Westies earlier, in his column, I don't remember the officer's name.
It's the Seattle Times writer.
Yeah, Seattle Times writer, columnist. He wrote about the longtime Garfield, right? High school police officer, and how this was a long-term, you're not rolling officers through just to police the place. You're putting somebody in there who's a part of the community. He's attending basketball games, all of those sort of things. I think that goes a long way in making the trust go both directions. And I think if they implement it like that, long-time staff, not just having an officer on campus because that is what's required by the regulation, I think it could do a tremendous amount of good.
I agree with Mike. And also there's the flip side of the coin is you're not always lucky enough to have a school resource officer with a gun and a badge who's as committed to
absolutely.
the
That's
kids.
absolutely true.
There are, I think we've all written stories about school resource officers that have had a harmful effect on kids in schools, taken down. We did a story earlier about a cop that lost a certification that had taken down and beaten up a kid for no reason in the middle of a high school in Spokane.
Right. Over policing, intimidation.
All of that.
Yeah.
One thing I'd say is that I don't think it's fair to expect particularly our high schools to be frontline social services agencies without a tremendous boost in resources. The amount of money the city of Seattle is talking about throwing at it is frankly kind of chump change. Seattle is already...
Well, they're spending millions on violence prevention programs.
Yeah. And Seattle is already lucky enough to have health clinics in every high school thanks to a voter-approved levy. I wrote a column years ago about how there basically is mental health counseling within high schools. I saw it with my kids, both at two different high schools. They had a therapist, their regular therapist in the school. But if we're talking about doing that much more at scale, you need to have, it's not just a Seattle Public Schools issue. The state has to play a much larger role in providing more resources for child well-being, especially given all the flashing red lights I talked earlier about, including the chronic absenteeism, which is like 1 in 4 kids in Washington.
I got an email from a listener named Greg Ferguson who says, mental health services are a nice yes and, but they do nothing to prevent shootings or student-on-student armed robberies. These inputs need a crime reduction response, preferably police action or presence, given the crazy spike in juvenile crime and persistent murder rates. I guess we've already talked about that a little, about some of the concerns, the pros and cons of police presence in schools. Let's talk about another, not just an academic approach, but a mental health approach in schools. And Mike, an example of school districts listening to parents, and that would be on the topic of cell phones. I got surveyed. I got 2 kids in the Mercer Island district, and they asked us, "What do you think of getting rid of cell phones in the class?" And if my children are listening to me, first of all, kids, why aren't you in school? But if they find out that their father said, yeah, do it, I don't know what they'll think. But Mercer Island is one of those school districts that starting this week, our school started this week, my kids have to put their phones in a pouch. It costs parents $15, and they put their phone in a pouch that gets unlocked, sort of electronically unlocked at the end of the day. This is, and this week, the state superintendent of public instruction, who doesn't have the power to make this happen district by district, the state superintendent encouraged the state school districts to somehow restrict cell phone use during school hours. What do you think of whether, and I said this is not just academic, but it's a mental health approach according to some districts.
I think that that this is an opportunity for all of us in the room to dunk on the youth
Right. That's what I'm saying. I'm
because
dunking on my own children.
We are all going to agree this is a great idea because it's not going to affect us. I do like. Seriously,
My favorite kind of idea.
That's what's going to happen
You'll
right
be
now.
clutching your phone while you talk
in fact,
about
let me
this.
just wrap up my point with that.
Okay.
And let's move it on because go ahead. How do you agree with me?
Okay.
I completely agree with you, Mike.
There you go.
Here's how I agree with you, Mike, since you phrased it this way. It's perfect. Well, come on. We all know the same thing. Social media, we're learning more and more, is harmful to probably our health, but especially young people. And if they're dealing with whatever the phone just said in the middle of the class, they're probably not absorbing the high-level math programs they have out there on Mercer Island. Or all the other schools.
Mm-hmm.
So we're just getting smarter about this. We tried, if you think about it, to get rid of cell phones in cars. That didn't work. But I think in the schools, we have a lot more support, again, parents, for the idea that a student should be able to feel, they already feel whatever social pressures they feel, like, just being in high school, middle school, whatever it is. But we're giving them a chance to get away from that. Some of them do. Some of the schools do release the phones at lunchtime.
Right.
So there's a whole debate about that.
Thank you for bringing that debate up because some people say that does nothing, and if they just can't wait to get right back to their phone, in between classes and all that, they're not being mentally taken out of that social media space.
And then if you're going to your phone at lunch, that's more sort of alienation from students for the physical interaction you're in school to have, right? Because now you're looking at your phone and you're acting like that person across the lunch table is the most boring thing that you ever saw. So, again, it's the many ways we agree with you. I think this is, it's a way to help students help themselves study better and not feel that exact same pressure. And look, everybody in this room knows adults are not doing that great at this either. I mean, come take this phone out of my hand right now.
I'm paying for their phone, so it comes back to me. We don't have to have this problem if I don't
if you
sign
turn
the
the
check every
switch
month.
off.
If I could raise one point though, if this does actually happen, for all the teachers and school administrators out there, learn the term burner phone.
It's happening.
And learn that people are going to bring in an old phone and give you that and secret away. They are crafty. If you have kids, I don't, but I remember how I was. I would have found the workaround as fast as I could have on this.
One of my
they
two
will
kids,
too.
One of
Exactly.
my kids says that this is happening in the bathroom stall.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep. It used to be cigarettes.
Cigarettes.
I feel chastened by Mike. I'll argue some counterfactuals to my own position. I think that you could argue that social media networks can actually help kids get a sense of connection with each other. You could argue that
For some of the shyer students, actually, you're right.
Sure.
You're
Right. I have
shyer, marginalized.
I said I have
Completely.
two kids that are trans, and I know they really found community on social media platforms, made them feel more belonging.
Yep.
You could also argue that there's a
time and place.
What's that?
Time and place.
I'm trying.
I know. No, I
Mike.
appreciate that.
I'll help you. I'll help you.
It still
What
sounds
about,
like you're-
what about
like you're
public
agreeing with
safety as well?
Yeah.
You've got kids might feel more comfortable. If we know the horrific school shooter problem. I don't
but
know.
does a
I
phone
knew
make
that
a
was
kid-
going to come up, of course, but
I admire you
you
for
have to
that.
measure sort of trade-off of what you gain from not being next to your phone. That is a legitimate concern.
How does a phone make a kid safer in a school shooting?
Just the sense that they could call for help.
Yeah,
they
that's
could
a
call
sense.
their parents.
Yeah, their parents are not going to help them. I'm not helping. I can't help my kids. Get off your phone. But I'll help you.
I'm
out,
not
Jonathan.
arguing these. I'm not trying to persuade you.
How about this? How about let's add belonging. How about that? It's an infringement on their privacy, their autonomy. It's patronized. It's paternalistic. It's we know what's best for you. Yeah. We're not going to let you figure out how to, because as you said, we all grown-ups juggle technology in our daily lives at work. So kids, you got to figure it out. And phones could be used in instruction.
Well, and will it also set back kids' ability to teach us how to use our phones? There's always the possibility that.
Right, tech support.
Exactly.
Degraded. Okay, final thing before we take a break. Since we started this talking about the close the youth detention center not happening, A note about another well-meaning and bureaucratic attempt at solving a problem, Jonathan. Seattle and King County are deciding what to do about the Regional Homelessness Authority. And your newspaper, the Seattle Times editorial board, just said, well, you ought to ditch one of your 3 oversight boards, the one made up of people who've been homeless or have provided housing or social services. Why is that? Are you going to speak for your ed board?
I'm not going to speak for the ed board. I used to manage the Project Homeless team, so I know a little bit about this. And I was an editor when this was created. The idea of having a lived experience board, as it's known, is that you don't have kind of pointy-headed academics dictating policies that don't make any sense on the ground for people who have been homeless. That said, the way they set up this board it was a 3-headed board. You had a policy board, an implementation board, and this experience board. It was an administrative mess. And the past 2 CEOs both said, we don't know who we're actually reporting to. And the fundamental problem with the RHA Regional Homeless Authority has been that on implementation, it has been a bit of a disaster, frankly. It hasn't been able to get contracts. Its first big policy push was to address downtown homelessness. It closed up pretty quickly. Getting rid of one of these boards, the reason for that is to try and clean up the sort of lines of administration.
Would you like to work for 3 different committees
No, I
and
would
try
not.
to figure out who you are pleasing and who you are producing results for? I mean, the King County Regional Homelessness Authority now has a new CEO named Kelly Kinnison, just arrived, I think, the beginning of the month. So no knock on her, but this agency is and has been a sputtering mess. They didn't deliver on the first assignment of clean up downtown. Other people did help with that. I think Dow Constantine did something recently, sending deputies to the transit centers, and that had some result, I guess. But, there were folks, if you asked them behind the scenes, do you think we should get rid of this entity? Off the record, they would say, yeah, it doesn't work.
The whole Regional Housing Authority, or
Yes,
the lived experience board part of it?
I'll get to that. The whole agency was what I was referring to, but certainly the lived experience board could serve as an advisory board, which is what they'll probably end up under the new structure. But what I was referring to, that things had gone so poorly for this entity that the thought was, we have to start over. The reason you don't want to start over is nobody has a better idea that could be stood up very quickly. So we are going to continue to tinker here, but these folks have a lot of explaining to do. There's a lot of money that's been spent, a lot of time has gone by, and the results are very, very slim.
Okay.
The lived experience component of this I thought was a good move early on, except what I didn't think was a good move is I think boards themselves can be a little unwieldy. And I think that sometimes if you have a level of expertise, you don't necessarily need to put them at a board level, right? You can have the group of people that you run your policy ideas through, get an analysis like you would for some high-level staff in a congressional office, get the analysis of the possible implications of your decisions, good and bad and otherwise. And then you have that analysis, you make that analysis public, and then you make decisions based on it. I mean, that's sort of the way, ideally the way Congress works. And I don't understand why this needed to be a board. It would have been much better to have this group of experts analyze policy and provide that analysis and make that analysis public, and then move the policy along as needed.
Going to Joni's point about trying to get rid of it, the reasons there is that previously it was a fractured mess of funding. You had competing cities, counties, different funders who each wanted different things, and there was not a coherent policy. This was an attempt to have a coherent, centralized policy, and to me, that concept still makes sense.
We are covering the week gone by for you on Week in Review, and when we come back in a moment, what is the Washington State Republican Party with MAGA and without it?
Support for KUOW comes from Third Place Books, presenting Jodi Picoult in conversation with Julia Quinn on Thursday, September 12th, discussing Picoult's new book, By Any Other Name, published by Random House. Tickets available now at thirdplacebooks.com.
KUOW is here to help you cut through the noise of election season. Check out Sound Politics, a new podcast hosted by me, Libby Denkman, and Scott Greenstone. Plus, KUOW's partnership with A Braver Way podcast hosted by Monica Guzman, your guide across the political divide. More at KUOW.org/elections.
Support for KUOW's car donation program comes from local Kia dealers, offering the new K5, a sports sedan with available 24-inch combined panoramic display that's compatible with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. More at kia.com.
You're listening to Week in Review here on KUOW. I'm Bill Radke. We're figuring out what happened this week and what it all means with Geekwire's Mike Lewis, political analyst Joni Balter, and the Seattle Times' Jonathan Martin. Did I say I'm Bill Radke? I am. I'm your host. Speaking of the Seattle Times, a Times columnist reported this week that when 500 Washington voters were surveyed for their reactions to various groups, Republicans ranked near the bottom, below atheists. Jonathan, I am skeptical that people across an entire state are that different from people in another entire state. But do you think Republicans are an especially poisoned brand in Washington state? And if so, why especially in Washington?
Well, the voting trends show clearly that Washington voters who might lean Republican are not staunch Republican, really don't like Trumpism. Trump has been a toxic brand for the Republican Party in Washington, and you know Danny's point several times. He had another column this week about a big Republican donor who endorsed Harris as part of actually a lot of other former Republican Trump staffers and big Republicans who endorsed Harris just because Trump is such a I guess a toxic brand. So you know the Republican brand in Washington that has worked is centrist. You know Rob McKenna was our AG. Jamie Herrera Butler has making a good run for the lands commissioner now. Kim Wyman was a longtime statewide Republican official, moderate centrist, even called country club Republican maybe, and not the MAGA Republican.
So in my view, the Republicans did this to themselves. They know Washington's a pretty blue state. The numbers on what you were just referring to, Jonathan, sort of in the polls, plus 14 to 18 for the Democrats on the national level. And I'm glad you mentioned Rob McKenna, because he is the gubernatorial candidate who has done the best in the last 15 years. His race against Jay Inslee in 2012, he was 3 points away. So maybe there was the message that you're saying in there, but what does the GOP do? They go out and go full MAGA, and that is not helping them at all. You know, so there are at this moment no statewide elected officials in the Republican brand, and you know they have to regroup. And
how will they regroup? What do you think happens? Donald Trump's career is not going to last that much longer. So what's left of our two-party system here?
So I called Bill Bryant, who was the 2016 candidate for governor. He did a little worse than Rob McKenna. And he says, you know, as soon as MAGA blows up or Trump loses, however you want to phrase this, that you've got to take the party, the GOP has to take the party back from MAGA, form two parties, do something, but do not let the current behavior toward, you know, we got MAGA mostly in most of our key races, not in all.
Well, form two parties, so that's Democratic dominance
or
even more than...
Or wash that party, the MAGA party, right out of the GOP.
Yeah,
wash them out, force them out.
Yeah, right.
So, what does everyone have against atheists? Seriously, I mean, I saw that and I was
considered amoral. We'll do anything.
I'm not. I probably. Let's say I'm atheist curious, and I'm not. But I was kind of wondering, like, that is the Republican Party ranks worse than atheists. You know, like how shocking it. The funny thing for me is that and I think Jonathan, Joni are both correct in that the MAGA brand worked really well in certain pockets of Washington state, worked very well. It worked really poorly in any populist pockets of Washington state. And so it's going to have to be a rethinking. I think that's going to be a fairly easy recalibration for the Republican Party. I mean, when I got here, there was a lot of 24 years ago, there was a lot of moderates in the party, what they used to call back in the day a Rockefeller Republican, right? And that was pretty pervasive in the party. A lot of those people are still around and would like a role. So my guess is it's going to be fairly easy.
You think they wash Trump out of their hair and it goes back to let's pretend this didn't happen and we're back to status quo ante?
But that's what every party does, right?
Well, follow the money as well. If the donors are not going to stay giving money to MAGA, the big time donors, and they're going to end up supporting moderate Democrats.
Well, and that's how the Democratic Party pivoted with the presidential election. As soon as the big donors said we're withholding $90 million, wow, it's amazing how quickly things began to pivot at that point. And I think that the same is going to happen.
If you're a conservative, but you don't like the Republican Party, you're more evangelical, or you want to drain the federal regulator swamp and impose big tariffs or whatever it is, why shouldn't there be a party for you? You get one seat in a coalition government or something.
I remember interviewing Steve Hobbs, who was a legislator, was a kind of a blue dog,
Right.
a very moderate Democrat who would vote Republican sometimes. And, he said it's always the roadkill. The middle is roadkill. And I think for Democrats, it's been a little bit easier to navigate because there's a broader, such a larger Democratic Party here,
right.
But it's hard to be in the middle. And, I think actually the active energy in the Democratic Party, maybe up until the issues we're talking about, the defund, no youth jail, the kind of the backswing of that, the Democratic Party's also had purity tests.
Let's talk about. Can we talk about one? I'm sorry. Did I?
No,
do you need to finish? Okay, because you're just right on the next thing I wanted to talk about, which is this fault line in the Democratic Party that showed up at the Democratic National Convention this month. This is Barack Obama.
We need to chart a new way forward to meet the challenges of today. And Kamala understands this. She knows, for example, that if we want to make it easier for more young people to buy a home, we need to build more units and clear away some of the outdated laws and regulations that made it harder to build homes for working people in this country. That is a priority, and she's put out a bold new plan to do just that.
Listen to all those Democrats cheering for more housing, yet there are plenty of Democrats in the Puget Sound area who do not want this.
Make it easier for more young people to buy a home. We need to build more units and clear away some of the outdated laws and regulations that made it harder to build homes for working people in this country.
They don't want that to happen. They don't like Trump, but they might agree with Trump when he says Democrats want to abolish the suburbs and the yard and garden cities like Seattle. Do you agree that this is a fault line in the Democratic Party, and especially pronounced on the West Coast?
Well, yes, of course. But I think that, some good has come from this argument, this debate. We've added a lot of add-dos and dad-dos, and I hope everybody knows what those are, dwelling units that are either attached or not.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think, and this is where this may be problematic in the Puget Sound area, I think it's a little unfair to say to people who were either born here or came here to live that, this connection that you have to nature, you're next to a green belt, or you have a nice garden, or trees in your yard or something. I think it's a little unfair to say to those folks, sorry, all the reasons you came here, born here, stayed here, raised your family here, you have to give those up. I don't think that's quite right either.
I think we're also
giving something up for when people can't afford to live in Seattle is not quite right.
Well, when you put it like that, it's a little gulp, choke.
It's a
tough
one.
Of course, no. I think we do have to do, and I'm mentioning add-os and dad-os is something that is already happening. Zoning changes are happening in Seattle statewide, so all of those will work themselves out over time. But also, I believe, didn't Kamala Harris also propose some kind of help on the down payment?
$25,000, yeah.
And so that's another way. What about insurance? Do you have any idea how much rising insurance rates are making it impossible for some of the subsidized housing and other low-income and moderate-income housing? It's a big deal.
Yeah, I think that there's a couple of things here that don't often get mentioned in terms of affordable housing. It's very, very difficult to build your way out of that, It's been very, very difficult historically in the United States. In fact, it's really not quite happened unless you had that build followed by a recession. Weirdly enough, and I mean, this is literally sort of the way the dominoes fall. Then you actually have that happen. It's happened in Seattle. So it's a much more complicated thing than changing zoning and building your way out of it. But the one thing that doesn't seem to get remarked on, either by the party bosses or on either side, is that maybe we're doing too much to front load everyone's major capital gains investment, which is their house. For most people, that's going to be the biggest investment you ever make. Why we front load that idea of buying a home? There's many places where you don't actually buy a home, but you don't have that same investment tool that you use then to leverage your kids' college education or we build so much. That was the great problem with redlining. Is it created generational poverty from people who couldn't make that next level up economically. We know that. I mean, economists have studied this extensively. Yet, we still push people toward home buying. Now, I'm not saying that I own a home. I'm not saying that that's inherently a bad thing, and I'm not saying we should remove that. It's like, you don't need to buy a home. We'll change the law so you don't have to. But I do think that should be a component, that there should be some sort of government-backed program that allows you to put that same money into not buying a home, but manage to have some investment tool that actually you can use that then as leverage for all the things, because a home isn't a home, right? A home is it's a pry bar for economic advancement. And that's the thing that we're missing in this component about we just need to build, all we can do is invest in homes, and so we need to build more of them. I think that there's another area of this argument that we don't often have.
That's a good point. I think that, Billy, I think you're trying to flag this as sort of a progressive fighting with each other. I see this as a generational split. I think most of there's a definite generation divide between the urbanist movement, and some of it is maybe protecting your own interests. You know, I think all four of us here in this room own a house, and there might be, and there's a
Barack Obama wants my home price to fall, wants my investment to go down in value.
Next, he's coming for your natural gas, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. And obviously, if you're on the other end of that, I work with a bunch of really smart, hardworking folks in our newsroom in our 30s
who will not own a home in
never
Seattle.
own a house,
never own a house in Seattle,
and it's affecting their interest in having kids and all of that,
and staying here,
right. And the other thing is, it really is a third rail for the federal government to say we are going to override, zoning rules. Well, or rules and make it cheaper. Well, some of those rules are like Joni's point, like natural gas furnaces, or you're going to have like building codes that require higher levels of earthquake retrofitting. There's going to be parking requirements, all this stuff at a micro level that can be very hard fought within cities. And I would be curious how Kamala Harris is going to be telling a bunch of large cities, mostly which are run by Democratic mayors, that they're going to need to, wipe away their land use rules in order to speed through home building.
Well, and that's been the problem. So everyone likes to make the Minneapolis comparison, right? Because they did away with single-family zoning. And the one difference in Minneapolis, the very, very clear, and I talked to the mayor at the time about this. The one difference, of course, is that they did not have environmental review. So you couldn't block the development like this actually did. It didn't. And the other thing is, in hindsight, it hasn't really led to that much development. That could also be because economically it's just not it's not a wash in money like Seattle is. But the thing is that when you have a situation where you can then put up impediments toward that development that you really want to happen with environment, and I'm not saying environmental review is a bad thing, it's a very good thing. But in Seattle,
it can be a tool.
It is absolutely a tool that people use to block development. And so you really have to make some bigger decisions about what you want your city to be like and what you want to allow before you can actually do this thing that makes this magical single-family zoning disappear.
Okay, I'm watching the clock. This is my job, and I want to talk more about this. There was a quote that I just read this week from the mayor of San Francisco who said, "America is not a museum. We build museums for preservation purposes. We protect some places for historical reasons, but cities are valuable because of their people, and to serve and protect those people and make sure they have a safe, affordable place to call home, all roads lead to housing." So I want to discuss this idea, America /Seattle / your favorite local, suburb is not a museum. and we just don't have time to do it right now. Jonathan, did you
Very
want to
quickly,
say
Seattle has not been a museum. Seattle's been adding housing like crazy.
Yes,
Seattle,
that's
by the
true.
way, doesn't have single-family zoning anymore.
Right.
You have
Statewide.
three units at a minimum. I see in my neighborhood in Wallingford that people are building new houses. There's 3 units built into it. San Francisco has been a museum. You look at the rates of adding the housing they've been adding, and it is a fraction of what Seattle has been adding. And it's not just because of the .com boom and the pandemic. Over time, they just don't add housing. So good on London Breed in San Francisco for recognizing their problem. Seattle doesn't have the same problem.
Good point.
People are leaving San Francisco. Sorry.
I've got to do my job and take a break now, and this will be another show. I just love this whole discussion. Will you come back? You'll come back. Right? Okay,
I'll
good.
just sit here till then.
Okay, sit here till then. Week in review. We're going to be right back with owls and more headlines.
KUOW FM Seattle, KUOW Tumwater, KQOW Bellingham. It's 12:54.
Hi, I'm Kim Malcolm, local host of All Things Considered. We're all looking to make the best use of our time, and that's what we do weekday afternoons. You can count on hearing from some well-informed people about what happened today and why it matters, and you get a chance to connect to something different, like the best in music, arts, and books. It's all there for you weekday afternoons, starting at 3, here on KUOW.
Support for KUOW comes from Bedrooms and More. With over 80 mattresses in their Seattle showroom, Bedrooms and More is dedicated to helping people find solutions for their sleeping and furniture needs. Learn more about their commitment to customer service and sustainable products at bedroomsandmore.com.
It's KUOW's Week in Review. We're on YouTube live streaming the show. I've got I'm Bill Radke, by the way. My panel this week, Joni Balter, political analyst. We got Seattle Times, Jonathan Martin, and Geekwire's Mike Lewis. And some stories we haven't gotten to yet. U.S. wildlife officials approve a 30-year plan to kill up to 450,000 barred owls in Washington and Oregon and California to relieve pressure on spotted owls who are littler and they need more space and they eat fewer things and they're getting outcompeted and maybe driven to extinction by the bards. Who came here, by the way, because humans forced them out of the eastern United States. Mike, any thought about a feeling about killing one owl to save its cousin?
Well, I remember back in the Pacific lumber days when the spotted owl was stopping logging, and people were creating boxes of, what was it, owl helper? Some sort of thing like that. So maybe the barred owl helper will make a return.
Yeah. Just real quickly, the Seattle Times quoted the head of Bird Conservation Oregon, Bob Salinger, who said even playwrights have reached out to him over the pathos of the situation. That playwright he was talking about is me. I called him because I am writing about this. Imagine the characters and the drama involved in all of this. So I'll tell you more about that.
Are you going to be one of those trained shooters out there at night?
Whatever it takes for drama.
Gotcha.
For the theater. Other stuff happening this week. Linwood Light Rail Extension opened like half hour ago as we record the show on Friday afternoon. So right on. Linwood and Mount Lake Terrace and Shoreline. Seattle to Kingston fast ferry service is back tomorrow. Went down this week, but there are staffing and boating shortages, so it might be a tough Labor Day weekend ferry trip. So you should probably just cut in line. Not really. That was sarcasm. Maybe the Linwood Light Rail goes to Kingston. I don't know. Flying's not perfect either. SeaTac airport officials dealing with the suspected cyber attack last week. Last I heard, the Wi-Fi and some electronic reader boards are still down, so you might see handwritten gate information on whiteboards. And that's true, and they recommend carry-on luggage and getting there 2 or 3 hours before your flight. I would rather go fly through SeaTac than go on the Boeing Starliner spacecraft, which went up in June for an 8-day mission.
Indeed.
And because of mechanical failures, the Starline will come back empty next week, and the crew of 2 will come back in a SpaceX capsule. Ouch.
Ouch.
Remember they could come back to a different, I guess to be elected president. I mean, that's
true.
That's how long.
Yes.
Remember the Soviet astronaut who came down to a different government because he was up there through the fall.
Hope things are going well between them, of course.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah.
A little bit of shameless log rolling. Look for an excellent Boeing story in the Sunday Seattle Times.
Good. Sunday Seattle Times. We got a minute and a half left, so I want to stop there and say, did anything make you, I could go on, but did anything make you smile this week?
You know, I was going to say this has been infrastructure week or month or year for Seattle. Like the combo of the light rail opening and that really cool, the waterfront is really coming together.
Seattle Aquarium, new Ocean Pavilion opened
and
up.
that big walk down. Yep. It is just Seattle is just like.
It just everything opened or
I know.
Reached its destination in the same week. I want to meet the shark from Indonesia, sort of a beige or gray shark. I think his name's Charlie, but I do want to meet him on the other side of the glass.
Of the glass, yeah. Good point.
It seems like you shouldn't ever be a shark and be beige. They seem to be
I think I misspoke. I think it's whitish gray.
Inherently,
if you're a shark, you be whatever color you want.
Exactly.
I think it's whitish gray. I just, yeah.
All right. Well, my final note, since I have a few seconds, is that the new Ocean Pavilion opened, and it's got leopard shark and big clams, and you're not going to find a bigger species of mantis shrimp than at the Ocean Pavilion. I learned on KUOW this week. The mantis shrimp uses a hammer-like appendage to smash open snail shells for food. The National Association of Snails said, quote, "Hey, you're killing barred owls. How about you shoot some mantis shrimp? Or at least cut off their hammer-like appendage." But we'll see if that happens. We got to say goodbye. Political analyst and contributing columnist Joni Balter, thank you.
Well, thank you. Very fun.
Geekwire contributing editor Mike Lewis, thank you, Mike.
Thanks, Bill.
Seattle Times investigations editor Jonathan Martin, who's packing up his bag on our live stream, even as you can't wait to get out the door.
I am on deadline.
He's on deadline, and it's Labor Day weekend.
Jonathan's always on deadline. Don't listen.
Go have fun. Thank you. Producer Kevin Kniestet. Running the board is Bernard Ouellette. Juan Pablo Chiquizo with social media and live streaming and audio support from Hans Twite. And I'm Bill Radke, and we have another date in a week.
Hey there, I'm Patricia Murphy, your morning host for Seattle Now.
And I'm Paige Browning, your afternoon host for Seattle Now.
Every weekday morning
and every weekday evening,
we give you a quick look at local news to keep you informed
and to deepen your connection